Welcome to the Learning Cosmos podcast. I'm your host, André Hedlund, educational psychologist, author, geek, and nerd. This show brings you science and learning through conversations with stellar people from different fields. Put on your spacesuits and hold tight. Our voyage into the learner's universe begins now. All right, folks. So, welcome to another episode of the Learning Cosmos podcast. And I'm very honored because I have Rebecca. Is that Schmor? How do I pronounce your last name, Rebecca?
Schmor, yes. Yeah,
Schmor,
perfect.
yeah. Sounds German to me. Is that German?
That's a German last name. You're right.
Okay, wonderful. So, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, Rebecca, let me start with perhaps the most important question, and it has to do with the importance of science. And as a scientist yourself, I mean, you are a researcher, right? So I can call you a scientist, I suppose.
Yes.
Why is science important, especially for education?
Perfect. Yeah, so you're right. I'm a social scientist. I would consider myself a social scientist. And so when I hear the word science, I think of research and I think of ideas. So just for a little bit of context, my research focuses very broadly on themes of language, culture, and identity. But even more broadly, so research in general, why is it important? Why it matters to me is really this, for me, it's the idea, I forget where I heard this, but it stuck with me, this idea that our perspective is our reality. So for me, just being able to think something means that maybe I can, become something or create something, or I can share that thought and others can create something from it. Um, and yes, we'll probably talk more about language together, but there's also I guess, quote in German. You might have heard it before, or the translation of it
Yeah,
is this idea, die Grenze meiner Sprache bedeuten die Grenzen meiner Welt, which means that the limits of my language are the limits of my world.
exactly.
So the limits of our thoughts and our ideas, I think, are also the limits of our world. So for
Yeah.
me, science is ideas, knowledge creation, and I think that's really just like the greatest asset that humanity has.
That's true. And super toll. Du kannst sehr gut Deutsch sprechen. Ja. I
Ach,
mean,
das ist
yes, I
ja.
can I can speak German too, Ich kann gut Deutsch sprechen. Ich habe ein bisschen gelernt, aber ich habe fast alles vergessen. I've forgotten everything. I haven't practiced in a
Doesn't seem
while.
like no, very good.
Okay. But yes, I think everything you said makes so much sense, Rebecca. I think science helps us understand the world, the reality as, more objectively instead of, being biased or, relying so much on our subjective
Mm.
perception of what's happening before our eyes, right? And why did you choose a career in science? Was that something that came from you as a person growing up and interested in knowing how the world works, or maybe your parents had something to do with it? So,
Yeah, for me, it was the path to science was through education.
okay.
So it had to do with actually German. It's because we
Yeah.
started German because I guess the for me the origin of it traces back to high school when I started learning German. It's a heritage language, but my parents don't speak it, so I learned it. And I applied for a scholarship and won that scholarship and spent a summer in Germany. And from there, the rest is history. But that basically language learning led to language teaching. So I started, that was my first professional role was in language education, and that led to a master's and then ultimately a PhD in language education as well, and specifically around multilingualism. I learned a few other languages along the way. My family is multicultural, multilingual. So
Awesome.
really, it's a very personal path. But yeah, science, I didn't realize that I loved research, and I'm so glad that education brought me there.
That's amazing. And I usually ask my guests to talk about learning. What is learning? How do you define learning? But since you are, well, an expert in language learning, so maybe you can tell me a little bit about that. I mean, even before we talk about that, you mentioned that you have learned other languages, such as,
So I've tried quite a few languages. The ones that I would say are part of my like daily or at least weekly language ecology would be German. I stayed in touch with my Gastschwester, my host sister, who's now
yeah.
like the godmother of my daughter and was
Oh,
my maid
wow.
of honor. We created a lifelong friendship there. So German's a big part of my life. I speak it to my daughter now as well. And then my with my husband, we speak Spanish and English together,
Ah, okay.
and then also Italian. So he has two. We can. I don't. The phrase first language is debatable, but he has two mother tongues, first languages, however you want to frame that idea.
Wow.
I'm more proficient in Spanish. I live in Mexico. That helps. Now I'm living
Yes.
in Mexico. Um, and then Italian, I've done research in Italian with teachers, and so really had to increase my proficiency there to end up like training teachers on theoretical frameworks and pedagogical strategies in Italian. So that I could not do when I started the research project, but that was a way of sort of integrating everything I was learning about learning theories and then applying it into my professional role. We can talk more later, but one of those concepts
Yeah,
is intercomprehension, which
sure.
if I'm just guessing from your language background what I know of it, and probably other listeners that if you know a language like in a family like the Romance language family, you already know that you can sort of understand some of the other
Exactly.
words, grammar, yeah.
Yeah,
And that's not like just an observation. There's actually a whole science around intercomprehension and how you can even kind of advance or accelerate your language learning by becoming more aware of things like cognates or false cognates and just
exactly.
parallel grammar structure. So that's how I got really more proficient in Italian off of my Spanish and also
Yeah.
French. In Canada, we study French. I studied French in school. So that's a
Wow.
little bit of
Yeah, I basically you explained how I got by Mexico because I speak Portuguese, right? I'm Brazilian, so pero estuve en México en febrero.
en febrero.
Sí, me encanta hablar español, pero para mí es un poquito difícil. It's a little difficult because again, I can get by. I can talk to people on the streets, and I had this driver who drove me around, and he helped me a lot, because he doesn't speak any English, so I basically used my portuñol to talk to him.
Português.
But
Eu,
again,
eu
it's
também posso falar um pouquinho de portunhol.
olha só, que
I
incrível!
went to Brazil
Yeah.
once, and that's how I survived there too.
Wonderful. So it's amazing. So here's a question because you're the expert here. So how do you refer to a person like you or me? Should we call ourselves bilingual or is it plurilingual? Is it multilingual? Is there a difference? Can we
That's
call
the big
ourselves polyglots
question.
or something like that?
I think we can call ourselves whatever we want and whatever we
Okay.
identify with, but or and there, I think it's a political choice
Uh-huh.
because research science can, I would say science is very political.
Yeah.
Ideas are politicized all the time. You said subjective at the beginning, object or so you said science and objective knowledge versus subjective knowledge, and I also
Yeah.
like to think of subjectivity as like our lenses that we use to see the world. So choosing even a label or a term to refer to yourself in terms of your language identity may align you with a certain field of thought, whether you
Yeah.
know it or not. So I consider myself a plurilingual, but I'm sure there's lots of people who call themselves bilingual or multilingual, and they might have the same understanding that I do.
Yeah.
Um, what the science says about it, and again, there's different we could call them, I guess, arguments in the
Yeah.
field or
Sure.
debates around these terminologies. But essentially, the way I've heard it distinguished is that So we can probably start with monolingualism, where monolingual ideologies essentially assume or even promote like unity through sameness, right? So like
Yeah.
one country, one language. Unfortunately, the result of that is like loss of language and culture and identity. But there's also multilingual or bilingual approaches. Again, people use them in different ways, but they're used often to describe languages as being very separate. So you could think of like a language curriculum. So I go to school and I take I take a French class, and then I have the rest of my day in English, and then maybe
Yeah.
there's like Arabic class on Saturday as a heritage language program. So it's all very separate. Then plurilingual ideologies and pedagogies focus on interconnection.
Yeah.
So whether that's like the interconnection of an individual's repertoire, and that I'm sure you've experienced this as well,
Yeah.
and we just kind of showed it how, you have like everything's connected. You have
Exactly.
lexicon in
Mhm.
common, you have even your life experiences. Like sometimes when I think about something that happened to me today in Mexico, but I'm talking to my parents in English, well, I have to sort of translate it, or it doesn't always happen automatically. So that's because languages are not separate. They live together
Yes.
in a repertoire, but also across repertoires, right? So like we just said too, Portuguese and Spanish also connect. So connection
Yeah.
versus connection. The
And well,
simplistic.
that's such a fascinating topic to me, and I was interviewing Ellen Bialystok, who's also based in Canada, but she works more with cognition and bilingualism. And I asked her a question that you might be able to answer because she said, "Well, that's not really my expertise, but the idea of translanguaging as a pedagogy, Ofelia Garcia comes to mind, and let me give you a little bit more context because here in Brazil now, there's a
Mhm.
boom of bilingual schools or schools with a bilingual curriculum or something like that. And I think more traditional teachers, they say, now we have to separate things, you have to have Portuguese lessons here, and then you have to go to a different class and have English lessons and so on.
And
But
language
some
only policy, so only English and only Portuguese.
Exactly, exactly. But then there are some experts saying that we should actually encourage translanguaging. So that means that we can have both languages in the same context, and that's not going to be confusing or difficult for the kid. So, what's your take on that, Rebecca?
Okay, yes, that's the big question as well.
Yeah.
There are debates, also very heated debates in my field in language education about those concepts. I like to subscribe to a more like umbrella view of plurilingualism, translanguaging, as a practice, as an ideology. I like to see kind of where they what they have in common and the shared direction that they can take instead of getting caught up in, the differences or the politics of it. While they have, merit, of course, I think it can be more productive to move forward with shared ideas, but
Yeah.
others may disagree. But one concept to that point, one concept there that for me, I feel I do have a stronger opinion about is the idea of named languages. And
Yeah.
so, and with the caveat that I'm also not a translanguaging scholar. And so I have taken the plurilingual route more.
Yes.
But I am familiar with this idea that, and to me, it does make sense that because it's that idea of a dynamic repertoire. So
Yeah.
one of the arguments in translanguaging is that there are no like named languages. Essentially, there are no languages. We don't have to name them because of that dynamic interaction. And so, if
Yeah.
I'm a speaker of Spanish and English, which I am, I'm actually not really switching. Like, why am I switching between a language? I'm actually just drawing on language in general and
Yeah.
making meaning. And that makes a lot of sense to me. Then I also hear very valid arguments about the importance of naming languages, especially indigenous languages, where if you can't name it, you can't protect it. So
Yes.
that's where I tend to favor the protection of heritage languages, indigenous languages, and the use of named languages. Obviously, translanguaging is about more than just named languages, but that's one of the areas where I know there's a difference. Again, the similarities, there's a lot of similarities too.
Excellent. And what about the research you're doing now, or the research you did when, when you were completing your PhD program? So what is exciting about the work that you do?
Absolutely, yeah. So I focused on plurilingual teacher identity for my dissertation and in other projects. And so for me, as we sort of talked about already, the value there is really just how this whole asset-based view of language can be really empowering, and again can help protect certain languages, maybe revitalize some. So I said I'm a heritage learner of German. Obviously, German is doing okay. It's
Yes.
she's doing all right. Die Sprache, she's doing fine. She has a
Yes.
whole country of speakers, but there are many heritage languages that would benefit immensely from teachers or just even the general public supporting multi or plurilingualism, however, whatever
Yeah.
word you want to choose, not just celebrating it, but really giving, not giving, but helping, I guess, supporting learners to draw on their repertoires, to draw on all their languages, to not feel ashamed about speaking one language or speaking a variety of a language with
Yeah.
certain accents or vocabulary use or whatever it is. So that's where I get excited about language education research is really, as I mentioned before, the connection to identity and how it can teach us, more about who we are as people, as communities. And I always remembered whenever I would start maybe writing a literature review or something,
Yeah.
I always felt the desire to write about diversity, the importance of linguistic diversity can be compared to the importance of biodiversity for the planet. And
Absolutely.
because all the knowledge that is like contained in the vessel of language can be lost, and that is
Yes.
the ecosystem of the world's languages.
This is so true. I remember watching a National Geographic documentary about Koro, I think was the name of the language, in
Mm.
Nepal, maybe somewhere near India. And at the time they were producing this documentary, there were only 80 speakers of that language. And I remember one of the linguists said that once they're all gone, all of the knowledge that they created, socially
Mhm.
created for centuries will be lost because it's not a there's no writing system, so it hasn't been recorded. So they were trying to record the language, and people don't realize that there's so much knowledge in heritage languages and indigenous languages as well, right?
Exactly. Different. So vocabulary for like naming even, natural parts of the world, or even just vocabulary or grammar systems that allow you to, I don't know, for example, like describe directions in relation to where you are
Yeah.
versus, a compass. Th those sorts of things may not seem important to everybody until you lose them. And I think it's a part of a broader conversation as well about, I see, of course, the value of having shared languages, of being able to use a language like English. We could probably talk in Portuñol together, but
Yes.
if I spoke to somebody who I didn't share another language with and it was only English, of course, there's value in that. But then there's also there's the risk of
Yeah.
the I guess machine of global English and what that becomes and what that the risk of losing and
Yeah.
other languages.
Definitely. And you mentioned that you are actually using German now with your daughter. And
Mhm.
I just came up with this question now because I think it's important. I talk to a lot of teachers and parents and families in general who are very worried that if you use another language while you're bringing up your child that may actually confuse your child, and you might delay their speech development or cognitive development? Or what do you think about that, Rebecca?
Yes, thanks for asking that. I think that's one of the biggest myths out there, and that's
Yeah.
right back to your first question. That's why science is so important, because it can actually change your behavior. You reframe your way of thinking, and then you pass on a language to your child instead of following maybe the advice from even authorities like teachers or school administrators or even past research. So absolutely, teaching, passing on a heritage language, or even for me, German is not my first. I don't like to use the word first and second,
Sure,
but
yeah.
it's not my dominant language, and that's okay. And I'm comfortable with that, and I've become comfortable with that through my involvement in research and plurilingualism. But I know that some parents hesitate to teach a language that they're not 100% confident in, or if they don't have all the vocabulary. Of course, I use strategies if I'm missing a word or
Yeah.
uh, I can't think of the right word. I'll find a way to communicate with my daughter, and a part of that includes not always using German with her. Of course, she's not
Yeah.
only going to know German, she's not only going to know English or Spanish or Italian. She can also learn whatever else she wants. But to your question, yeah, that myth I think becomes very, very dangerous because that intergenerational transmission is the most important process for language vitality.
Yeah, that's great. And I have a question that is a little bit more personal. I mean, it has a lot of personal value to me because I am now learning Chinese Mandarin. I'm going to China in a month, actually. So I'll be there teaching
Yeah.
students, yeah, language teachers actually, but I'll be teaching in English, obviously, because my Chinese is really basic. I mean, I started exactly a month ago.
Mhm.
It's very difficult, I'll tell you. I mean, certain aspects of Mandarin are very difficult, like the different tones and, word order, the structure of sentences and everything. And you mentioned interconnectivity, right? So the thing is, there's absolutely nothing in my repertoire that
Yeah.
resembles anything in Mandarin. So what tips do you have for a 39-year-old man trying to learn a new language that is actually a very tough language?
Yep. I also taught for a summer in China and went through the same feeling that, oh,
Oh,
my usual strategies are not working. Yeah, I agree. For me, there wasn't much intercomprehension in vocabulary. But I think what you actually just named a lot of the strategies that I ended up using and that people can use. It's really that meta language that you just used. So
yeah.
word order, like just being aware that, okay, I'm using this new code, this new system, this new language, and I'm aware that I'm going to put the verb at the end instead, or not in the middle, or subject, object, whatever. It's going to
Yeah.
change. Just knowing that, I think it puts you way further on the path of learning. And also, I think the experience of having learned a language gives you so much insight because of course it's not just about like acquiring vocabulary or memorizing things. That's doesn't always work anyways, but
Yeah.
that's for me. But just the attitudes and the lived experience of struggling through those awkward interactions. I remember coming home from China and remember feeling that I had this sort of phrase I kept saying to myself. My mantra was like confident humility. Like I
Yes.
didn't want to be one of those people who, not those people, I didn't want to use
Yeah.
English without at least attempting to speak Mandarin
Yeah.
in public. And so that was something I had to hold on to was like, it's okay. I have to be confident in my humility because I also had to eat. So to order some dumplings,
Yes.
I had to use the words, and they
Yeah.
often didn't have English in their repertoire to communicate with me. So
Yeah.
gestures are great too, and that's also a plurilingual view that your language repertoire extends to gestures and body language and even technology. A lot of I
Yes.
find it unfortunate that a lot of I understand why many teachers are against certain uses of technology, but I find it unfortunate that we don't. I think in general, learners are not encouraged to be empowered by technology in their language learning. I see more conversations around like plagiarism, and those are valid concerns. But I just also have this lens that technology is an extension of your
Yeah.
language repertoire. And if you've ever seen like tourists or maybe expats living for a short time in Asia, in China, I saw it. It works. Like
It
there are
does. Yeah.
technologies you can speak and then it speaks back. And that's what people, some of my students use that with me, and I embraced it, I think, because of the research background that I had.
Yeah.
Instead of, yeah, like the worst thing I think is to punish or limit
Sure.
people from using the tools that can help them so much.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned technology because now everybody's talking about generative AI, and I know that if we don't go through, the cognitive effort of actually, trying the language, we're not going to learn that. I mean, of course, since I'm going in a month and I really don't have time to learn a lot, I will rely on, some kind of app to translate or interpret a lot. But at the same time, every day I'm making the effort of actually learning and watching tutorials. And so, how do you feel about specifically generative AI and language learning, and even I don't know, maybe your students might use generative AI to write their essays. So what is your general feeling about ChatGPT and other types of AI?
Again, I think like it's become a polarizing debate,
Yeah,
and the limits and all this. But if we look, into the past, we can see similar debates that have happened with even language use. And so now plurilingualism has
yeah,
become this like trending, keyword, and more people are getting excited about it. But for so long, like English only, target language only was the norm. And that changes and it changed over time. And I think I can imagine something similar happening with technology, with AI specifically, that also the more people fear what they don't know.
yeah,
And so the more teachers and people in positions of authority become comfortable with that and can also model positive behaviors in relation to AI, I think the more students will benefit. Because
yeah,
with language, like I'm not teaching languages anymore, but when I was, um, I always, tried to give as many, examples and model as many sort of strategies or that I could. And I think that's another strategy that you will bring into your classes with your teacher candidates is
yeah.
you have maybe you haven't learned Mandarin or you're in the process now, but you've learned languages, and that's something that you're going to be able to connect over.
Most definitely. And you mentioned that you work with identity and language, and I think a big issue here is who should teach us? Who should be teachers?
Mhm.
Who can become teachers,
Mhm.
And also the idea of accent, right? So
Sure.
we have been, I mean, I'm sure you've have this conversations before with other people. I've talked about it with students and I've heard are native speakers better placed, let's say, to teach a language just because they were born in the country? And what about accents? Should we be, I don't know, maybe ashamed of our accents because I don't feel like we should embrace plurilingualism, right? So what can you tell us about native speakerism and native speakers as teachers and the place of accent?
Yeah, thanks for asking all the big questions.
Yeah,
I see on LinkedIn and other platforms these sorts of people engaging in these ideas, and I have a very strong opinion about this. And again, it comes from my research perspectives, and it's that first of all, I'm not sure I even believe in the term native speaker.
yeah,
So that's the very first thing. And you've heard me say throughout our conversation, I don't like the first language, second language term.
yeah, Yeah.
And that comes from that because, so to give you a very personal example, my husband is a quote unquote native speaker of Spanish and Italian.
Mm.
But there's things that he learned in by studying in Canada. He learned that word in English, and so he actually can't say when he talks to his, well, now she's passed away, his grandma, for example, in
Yeah.
Italian. So is he no longer a native speaker of Italian? Of course not. He's a very plurilingual person as well. And so I think that it's yeah, the term native speaker is absolutely used as a way to discriminate in hiring processes, in university admissions, and all these sorts of systems. And I carry that privilege of being able to call myself a native speaker. I was born in Canada, and I grew up
Mm.
speaking English with my parents. Although I don't know how often I don't know, few months whenever I meet new people, I hear comments, people ask me like, oh, what's that accent? And so
Yeah.
that's an interesting experience because I know what they're asking. And it's still a different experience for me because I can still claim that role, that identity. I don't want to. I don't actually, I don't care to identify with it.
Yeah.
But I have also that privilege of being able to say, yeah, to me, it doesn't matter. I know for a lot of people, it's the difference between getting a job or not.
Yeah.
Um, but all of that is to say that like if you use more than one language, and we could argue at this point that almost everyone in the world uses more than one linguistic code, whether or not it's language. Like you don't talk to your boss the same way you talk to your, I don't know, your partner or
Your
your friend.
buddies, your soccer buddies or, or something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
You're always switching linguistic codes. So we all navigate different linguistic codes. And so that native speaker label, it's not, for me, it's not useful. I
Yeah.
see that other people are starting to see and agree that it's not useful. Unfortunately, the people in positions of power, not so much, or not
Yeah.
fast enough to
Yeah.
affect people's livelihoods who work in the language field. And I have an even stronger opinion, which is that native, quote unquote, native
Yeah.
speakers, especially of English, who have not learned other languages, are absolutely not as qualified as somebody who learned English, who speaks another language, maybe learned a
Yeah.
second or third language. Like for me, it's not about native or not. It's about, language learner or not.
Exactly.
And we all have an accent.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for saying that because I think there's more awareness now. But at the same time, I also come across a lot of ads, especially from Asia. I have to be honest. From Asia, they're looking to hire either a Native American speaker. Well, that doesn't even make sense. A Native American speaker would be an indigenous person, Native American, right? But anyway, a native person who was born in the United States, let's say, or a native British person or something like that. So I was actually quite surprised when I got the email from China because I'm not a native speaker,
Mhm.
so and I found that well, maybe they're changing their perspective. I don't know. Something is happening, but I still come across a lot of ads. And what you're saying, and I completely agree with you, Rebecca, is that people who have gone through the experience, the struggle even of learning languages and learning how to teach languages, no matter if they were born in the country or not, they should be more qualified to teach languages, right? Not somebody who
Exactly.
was, well, lucky enough, or I shouldn't even
Yeah.
say that, to be born in this place. And yeah,
Random.
exactly, right?
Exactly.
So that makes
And
sense. Yeah.
unfortunately, yeah, accent and so native speaker status, accent and race, it's all part of this, politicization of identity. And so
Yeah.
it's interesting you say that you're seeing a change with more openness to hire someone from Brazil, for example, because
Yeah.
even I've seen the use of like a passport holder status as like
Yeah.
a barrier to employment. But all of it works together. And yeah, again, that's where science and research kind of gives you, I mean, maybe it doesn't change like today, but it gives
Yeah.
you sort of perspectives and tools, hopefully, to make these sorts of opportunities available to qualified people from no matter what background or identity markers they have, but hopefully sharing the identity of language learning and language teaching. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember, was it Kashru, I think, was the one who talked about the different circles and, the inner circle, the outer circle, and the expanding circle. And then the inner circle had to do with countries that had English as their first language, and then they were colonized by the British Empire or something like that, including the United States. So they hold a different status. I think a lot of people here in Brazil, this is certainly true. I think if you talk to students who might want to start, prospective students, I want to start an English course, but which accent do you teach? They say like American or British or something like that. So they have this dichotomy, when they are looking for a course, and I think people will judge you if you don't sound right to them, right? And do you also see that in your context? I mean, now you're in Mexico, maybe more in Mexico than in Canada, but does that make a difference in your context as well, Rebecca?
Absolutely. I think also that's where identity plays a big role because I and I think people learn languages for many reasons, sometimes employment, sometimes heritage interest, sometimes because you fell in love. I don't know. There's lots of
Yes.
reasons to learn a language. I've tried all those reasons. But I think it's what those reasons have in common is uh, identifying with a group, another group, a group that you're trying to kind of get into, right? Because you don't
Yeah.
currently have the language skills in common with that to communicate with that group of people or community or whatever you want to call it. Um, but um, but yeah, I think that in terms of like making that decision, not accent, but maybe variety does play a big role there. So even for me, like I actually before I met my husband, I still have a good friend. She's still my friend. I have
Yeah.
an Argentinian friend. And we traveled together to Italy. Anyway, so we on the trip in Italy, we went with her grandma, who was Argentinian.
Oh,
She spoke Argentinian Spanish the whole time. I started kind of picking up on it. And then when I met my husband shortly after that, I like switched. I switched over to Mexican Spanish. And
yeah,
anyone who sort of learned a bit of Spanish probably knows that those varieties are quite different.
they
Uh,
are. Yeah.
me llamo, yo me llamo, it's so different. Even the
Yeah.
pronunciation, vos sos, tú eres, they're so like
Yeah.
not only the accent, like in terms of pronunciation, but even vocabulary is different. So for me, if I married a Mexican and learned Argentinian Spanish, that would obviously play a big role in my feeling of kind of belonging. And I think that's what it's
Definitely.
really about with identity and language and culture is that's what for me the beauty of language learning is that it gives you it's like not 100%, but it gives you a chance at being another person. Like you get a chance to kind of step into a different version of yourself, a different world. Like because I know German, like I attended a graduation ceremony of my host sister in Germany. Because I know Spanish, I have had like Christmas in Mexico. Like I've
Oh,
had these
wow. Yeah.
different experiences that I would never have had access to without knowing those languages. So
Yeah.
yeah, belonging, I think, is a key part of the experience.
Definitely. And that's the beauty of learning languages, that having access to those different cultures. But let me ask you a little bit about your work, and then we can move on to geeking out a little bit, maybe. But I want to ask you, are you doing research right now, or I think you are helping
Mhm.
students, right, with academic writing. So can you tell us about what you're doing?
Yeah, so I have two professional roles at the moment.
Yeah.
So I'm a co-editor of a journal. It's called the Journal of Belonging, Identity, Language, and Diversity.
Oh, wow.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So a colleague and I, Sarah Jones, my colleague and I took over the
Yeah.
editorship of the journal earlier last year. I don't even know what year it is. But
Yeah.
we transitioned. The previous editors mentored us into the role. It was a very good experience. And this journal is, for me, it's a very special journal because it disrupts the traditional model of academic publishing. We use a transparent peer review model. So essentially,
Great.
there's no reviewer two. There's no, that's sort of a meme or joke in academia where reviewer two always leaves the meanest comments.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Thank you for clarifying. Reviewer two
So
is dreaded, like yeah.
exactly. So instead
Yeah.
of receiving those comments and not knowing what to do with your feedback, we match a peer mentor with the author. They develop the manuscript together. It's a
Nice.
very rigorous process. It goes through multiple rounds. It goes through other, editorial revisions as well. And so it's for us and for the community that JBuild has developed. JBuild is the acronym.
Yeah.
Um, it's really a very inclusive and accessible way to participate in academic publishing, and it's also free open access. So that means we don't charge authors to publish, and we don't charge readers to view the
Amazing. Yeah.
art.
And
So
I will link everything down below for everybody who's watching or listening so you can find more information about it. Wonderful.
perfect. So I'll
Yes.
give you the link for that. And then my other professional role is as an academic editor and coach. So I've been working with mostly graduate students, so PhD students, on a variety of things. I support them with strategic planning overall. So just planning out strategic academic goals, systems to actually, make that progress that sometimes
Yeah.
seems very challenging, and we encounter so many barriers to getting to the end of
Paralyzing sometimes, to be very honest. Yeah. Yeah.
so strategic planning, but also support with like publishing the whole process, and also working with some post PhD or later I shouldn't use that word, later year
Yeah.
PhD students who are looking to get on the academic job market. So I also support with feedback on teaching and research statements, and even developing research plans to get more funding. I do a little bit of everything in that role.
Wow, that's amazing, Rebecca. And do you have any time to read anything outside that scope? Like, because I yeah, because I assume you probably love reading, after all. You speak a lot of languages, you've been into language education for a while, and I assume you like literary books as well. Do you have time to read those?
Well, my daughter sleeps, so she naps a lot still, so that's good. So that gives me some time. So recently I've always been more of a nonfiction
Ah,
reader,
okay.
but I've always enjoyed like biographies and just learning about people's life trajectories. But recently I've been getting more into kind of entrepreneurship books, which is
Ah, okay.
the role of building an academic business. And so that's kind of a whole new world that I've stepped into. And so I've been very inspired by especially a lot of like content by female and they say mompreneurs, so
Mompreneurs, yeah.
entrepreneurs. So that's been on my some things on my reading list during my daughter's naps
Ah,
recently.
wonderful. And does reading play an important role as well when it comes to language learning? I mean, I've read books in German, but
Mhm.
it's always difficult because my German level is not that high. But do you think reading is also important for language learning?
Absolutely. And I think that's where you can use a lot of strategies that then you can also apply to things like listening and other skills or other areas. Now, the four skills are the four traditional skills. We can also view them from the lens of modes, so like reception and production and mediation, and that's another conversation. But in
Yeah.
terms of like listening to someone in another language, being able to have the experience of guessing from context in a like while reading, I think gives you a lot of it prepares you really well then to use that strategy. If you used it first just by listening to a conversation, it might not be as effective. And I think that people, in yourself included, might have had that experience already where they say like if I speak Spanish and I hear Portuguese or I speak German and I hear Dutch, I might not know what people are saying, but if I read it, I'll understand like 90%.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
reading absolutely plays a whole role and literacy in general. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's always fun when I recognize a new Chinese character from
Yeah.
text. Like I go like, oh, I know what that means actually, and you know, I
One
think,
hand.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. There's a sense of achievement, I guess. Like, oh, I didn't know that last week, but I do now, so I'll keep going because I'm actually learning, apparently, right?
Exactly. I did not learn that many characters, but I did save myself from getting on the wrong bus by being able to recognize the name of at least the cities and the region. That was helpful.
You see, wonderful. And well, we're moving towards the end here, Rebecca. And I like to ask my guests: do you consider yourself a geek or a nerd, or maybe both? You know, because it's different, right? So a geek is more into
Mhm.
sci-fi. You said
Okay.
you're not into fiction so much, but a nerd maybe. You delve into different scientific areas as well, like physics? I love astrophysics, for example. What about you?
I'd have to disappoint you with my
Yeah.
answer, but as a consolation, I can share that my parents are they definitely identify as nerds or geeks or both, and they actually gave me my middle name, Leia, based on the
Oh, okay.
princess from Star
That I
Wars.
didn't, yeah, now that you mentioned it. Okay, so that's Star Wars. Okay. Wow, look
So,
at that. Yeah.
yeah.
So you were the chosen one, you know? So that's it.
You
That's
know better.
amazing. Yeah, that's the thing. My wife is not really into sci-fi, you know, so I have to really push her if I want to watch something together. And the last movie we watched together was the new Superman, right?
Mm.
And it was fun. She actually enjoyed it, or at least she said so. You know, I don't know if she did enjoy it, but it's fun, I guess, because I'm always that kind of person who wonders. You know, I'm always curious about how things could be different, even though, you know,
Mm.
they don't make a lot of scientific sense. Like nothing can be really explained through physics there in that movie because, you know, it's all wrong. All the physics
Mm.
is wrong there. But maybe you have that for something else. I don't know. So do you have that kind of I don't know, should I call it an escape valve maybe from reality, and then something that
Mm.
you delve into and you go like, wow, is there
Yeah,
something? Yeah.
I think it honestly it was and has been language learning. So maybe I'm a language nerd. That's
You
probably
are,
all
for
I know.
sure you are. Yes. I mean,
But that's what like when, especially since I said I started in high school with German more seriously, I had studied some French, but German was like my first language love. And I other people in high school were going to parties and whatever. And I was sitting in my room studying the cases and yeah, watching, videos and writing down sentences.
very
Yeah.
good. Et comment va ton français? Mon français n'est pas bon, mais je comprends un petit
C'est
peu.
longtemps que je n'ai pas parlé en français, mais ouais, pour moi, le français a toujours été une langue plutôt académique que sociale.
Ah,
Donc, je le
oui.
parle pas beaucoup, mais je peux le lire, je peux l'écrire plus.
Je peux lire bien, mais je ne parle pas bien. J'ai besoin d'étudier. I have to study more, you know. But yeah, that's the thing. You said it. If I get a text in French, I can
Mhm.
understand so much. Of course, less than Spanish. I can probably understand 95% of Spanish, you know.
Exactly.
I have a book by Vargas Llosa, you know, the Peruvian
Mhm. Ah,
Nobel
okay.
Prize winner. So I have a book here. I bought it in Peru a couple of months
Ah,
ago and I started reading it, and I can read very easily. But French, because French is a Romance language, but with a lot of
a lot
interventions, you know?
of vowels, a lot of
Exactly.
extra spelling is different, but
But
è
such a
quello
beautiful language. Yeah.
italiano è l'unica lingua che non abbiamo parlato in questa intervista.
Ma mio italiano non è buono, you know? So è difficile per me, ok? Capisco ma non parlo bene. Okay.
It has some things in common, like eu posso, eu posso. Like it's
Yes,
got
in Portuguese is
similar.
the same. Posso is the same. Yes.
Yeah.
But here's a fun fact. I've been teaching business English to a group of Italian
Oh,
workers, from Milano, the north of Italy, and then one of the groups I'm teaching is very, very basic, like A1 or maybe even pre A1. They have absolutely no contact with English. And what I do is I use a lot of Portuguese with them sometimes, just if they don't get anything, or I use Google Translate and then I try to pronounce the Italian words right. And it works apparently. So I think I have been learning a lot
yeah.
of Italian from teaching them English because I have to get my point across. So yeah, so Italian is fun as
Yeah.
well.
Portuguese from listening to my Brazilian students in class.
See,
Yeah.
that's the magic of language learning, right? And I have two more questions for you, Rebecca. So I could spend, hours with you, but I know you have to attend to your daughter. But so what are some tips maybe that you can share with either people who are trying to learn a new language or people who are actually trying to, maybe you can focus more on people who would like to follow the same path as you have as a researcher in language education. So what can you tell us?
This may not be surprising, but I think my best tip, I could give more specific strategies and things, but overall, I think it's about identity. And I think
Yes.
that taking on like even just taking on the identity of a language learner or taking on the identity of like calling yourself a French speaker. Like for me, and this is not only my experience, I know many others who learned French in Canada and came out feeling like they, knew nothing, which is
Yeah.
so unfortunate, but also very likely a result of the way it was being taught and the native speaker ideals around that, and perfectionism and all this. But if you can even, yeah, start calling yourself a speaker or at least a learner or a
Yeah.
user of a language, I think that's huge. Um, and the same thing would go for research. If you like once you start seeing yourself as a researcher or a scientist or whatever identity marker you want to use, I think that's when you start to become it, and that can only lead to, even more development and progress. So of course it's about identity, right?
That's so true. And I'm learning Chinese, I told you, and I know how to I know how to tell people what I do for a living. So I know how to say that I'm a teacher. I know how to say that I'm an English teacher. 我
Yeah.
是, right? 英文老师. So I'm an
Oh,
English teacher.
you sound really good. I forgot about all
I've
the tones and everything. That
I
sounded
I have been practicing those tones like around the clock, but
awesome.
it's the interesting thing is that now I actually want to tell people that 我是中文学生, which is I'm a student, a learner
Yeah.
of Chinese, because I think I want people to see me as someone who's trying, like making the effort, but I'm not there yet. But
And
please help
if
me.
you do
Yes.
that, you create this, we call it in research, language learning research, it's an affordance.
Yeah.
Like ecology perspective. So you or creating this opportunity for yourself. If you were just quiet and I don't really speak or like one or two words, but if you say, hi, I'm a learner of Chinese, well, that opens up like any kind of conversation. Maybe you won't understand everything, but every single time you say that, you're going to learn at least a new word or two, or you're going to learn a new
Exactly.
strategy. So that absolutely, I think, will lead to a lot of learning experiences.
Wonderful. And my last question is, so do you think it's important, or how important is it to make this science, language learning, language education accessible to the general public? Because like I said, a lot of parents, a lot of families, a lot of teachers, of school managers, they still believe that bilingualism is bad, will delay cognitive development. So, what should we do more? How do we get that out there? How do we spread the word on this?
I like that question. And The answer is also not a surprise. It's about language, of course, language and
Yeah.
identity. But really, I think that, first of all, it's extremely important. And I think that it's so unfortunate that so much academic, scientific, or so much scientific knowledge is like stored up in academic language, and that makes it inaccessible. I think you're referring to accessibility also in the terms of just the availability of information,
Yeah.
but even language makes it inaccessible. Another thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently in my role as a journal editor is also time as a barrier. As a new mom, time is an
Yes.
extremely important. And so that's made me also understand how people are limited by time and in their ability to access, or just read something new. So something, for example, with JBuild, the journal, that we're starting is just a LinkedIn page. And so we're going to be posting little, snippets, short paragraphs,
Nice.
summarizing the articles for people who maybe don't have that time or maybe don't have necessarily the academic repertoire developed
Yeah.
to go read a 20-page academic article, but can really benefit from the information there. So I think that sort of the academic term is knowledge mobilization, but making that information available and making it available. The last thing I would say is by embracing multimodality, because
Yeah.
we learn through not just words. Also, of course, everyone has different abilities and can access or not access certain modes, but people who can access visual plus auditory plus whatever, the research is showing that, of course, that supports understanding, that allows for different ways to access knowledge.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Es war super mit dir zu reden. You know, so my German is coming back now that I'm talking to you. But the last thing I want you to just tell the audience now, people listening to us is where can they find you? I know you are active on LinkedIn, right? I've seen a couple of posts. Do you have a website or social media or something?
Yeah, so yeah, it's easy. It's rebeccaschmor.com. That's where I house my academic consultation business. And then, yes, you're right. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm looking to increase my presence there and increase my engagement there. I'm not on any other form of social media by choice, and I love the LinkedIn community that I've found at least, and how
Yeah,
that's we found each other on LinkedIn.
we did.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, we connected like a few years ago and saw that we had similar professional backgrounds and interests. And I just love the ideas that are exchanged there. So I'm on LinkedIn and I plan to stay on there for as long as it stays like that.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for accepting the invitation, Rebecca.
Of course. Thank you so much for the conversation. And yeah, we will stay in touch.
Definitely. And folks, stay tuned for more episodes of the Learning Cosmos podcast. Bye bye.